The headlights cut through the North Carolina darkness like knives. 15 cars, maybe 20, all of them filled with men in white hoods. They're driving slowly through the black neighborhood of Monroe, windows down, shotguns visible. The message is clear: we own this town. We own you. But tonight, something's different. As the Klan convoy rolls past one particular house, a figure steps onto the porch. He's holding a .45 caliber pistol in one hand, an M1 carbine rifle in the other. Behind him, silhouettes emerge from the darkness. 10 men, 15, 20, all armed, all ready. The lead Klan car slows down. For 5 seconds, nobody moves. Then the Marine on the porch does something nobody expected. He raises his rifle and aims directly at the windshield. What happens next will rewrite everything you thought you knew about the civil rights movement. His name was Robert F. Williams, and in 1957 he did something that wasn't supposed to be possible in the Jim Crow South. He made the Ku Klux Klan run. Not with marches, not with songs, not with prayers, with guns. This is the story they erased from your history books. The story of a black Marine who looked terror in the eye and said, "Not tonight, not ever again." And what you're about to discover will make you question everything you were taught about how the civil rights movement really worked. Because while one narrative was being written for the cameras, another was being lived in the shadows, with bullets and courage and a simple truth. Sometimes the only language oppression understands is force. You're not ready for this part. Let's rewind. Monroe, North Carolina, 1925. Robert Franklin Williams is born into a world designed to break him. This isn't just segregation. This is terror as government policy. Black people can't vote, can't testify against white people in court, can't sit at the same lunch counters, can't drink from the same water fountains, can't even look at a white person the wrong way without risking death. And the Klan? They're not some fringe group hiding in the woods. They're the sheriff, the mayor, the businessman who owns the grocery store, the teacher at the school, the pastor at the church. They hold parades down Main Street in full regalia. They burn crosses on lawns as warnings. They lynch black men for sport, then take photographs with the bodies and sell them as postcards. This is America in 1925. Robert grows up hearing these stories. His grandmother tells him about the day the Klan rode through and dragged a man from his home, how they beat him in the street while his children watched, how nobody could do anything, how nobody was allowed to do anything. "Why didn't anyone fight back?" young Robert asks. His grandmother looks at him with eyes that have seen too much. "Baby," she says, "because fighting back meant dying, and not just you, your whole family. Everyone who looked like you 10 miles. Robert Williams hears these words. He remembers them, but he doesn't accept them. By the time he's a teenager, something is burning inside him. Not rage, not yet. Something colder, sharper, clarity. He watches a black man step off the sidewalk to let a white man pass, watches his father lower his eyes when a white shopkeeper insults him, watches his mother clean houses for white families who won't even say thank you. And he thinks, this isn't natural, this isn't right, this is a system, and systems can be broken. But breaking this system requires something most people don't have: training, discipline, and weapons. So in 1943, at 18 years old, Robert F. Williams does something unthinkable. He enlists in the military. The U.S. Marine Corps changes everything. For the first time in Robert's life, he's trained to fight, to shoot, to strategize, to lead men in combat. For the first time in his life, he's treated, at least nominally, as an equal. Sure, the military is still segregated. Sure, racism still exists. But on the battlefield, a bullet doesn't care what color you are. A grenade doesn't check your birth certificate. Robert learns to field strip an M1 Garand in 30 seconds, learns to calculate firing ranges, learns small unit tactics, learns how to hold a position against superior numbers. He learns something else too, something more important than any weapon. He learns that courage is contagious. When one man stands up, others follow. When one man refuses to back down, others find their own strength. The Marines teach him superior firepower plus superior position equals victory. Robert Williams takes this lesson home. After his service, he returns to Monroe in 1955, and everything has changed. Not the town. Monroe is still the same racist nightmare it's always been. Robert has changed. He's no longer the boy who watched his people suffer in silence. He's a trained Marine, a marksman, a tactician, and he's had enough. He joins the local NAACP chapter, starts organizing, starts pushing back against segregation through legal channels. But legal channels in 1955 North Carolina, they're a joke. When black children try to integrate the public swimming pool, white parents drain it and fill it with concrete rather than share. When black families try to move into white neighborhoods, their houses are firebombed. When black men are accused of crimes, any crimes, real or imagined, they disappear into the prison system, or worse. The police? They're in on it. The courts? Rigged. The system? Working exactly as designed. And Robert Williams realizes something that will define the rest of his life. You can't negotiate with terrorists. You can only make them afraid. Here's what they never told you. In 1958, 2 black boys, ages 7 and 9, are arrested in Monroe. Their crime? A white girl kissed one of them on the cheek during a game. Read that again. A white girl kissed a black boy, and the black boy is arrested. The boys are held in jail for 6 days, no parents allowed, no lawyers, no phone calls. Then they're convicted and sentenced to indefinite detention in a reformatory. The white girl? She says it was just a game. She says it was her idea. Doesn't matter. This is 1958 North Carolina. A black boy was kissed by a white girl. In the eyes of the system, that's basically rape. The case makes national news, international news. People around the world are horrified. But in Monroe, the Klan celebrates. They hold rallies. They patrol black neighborhoods at night. They fire shots into houses. They burn crosses. The message is clear. Know your place, or your children will pay. Robert Williams watches this happen. He watches 2 little boys have their childhood stolen for playing a game. He watches the Klan terrorize his community with impunity. He watches the police do nothing. And something inside him snaps. Not breaks, hardens. He holds a meeting at his house, calls together every able-bodied black man he trusts. They want war, he says. Let's give them war. The men look at each other. They know what this means. I'm not talking about marching. I'm not talking about singing. I'm talking about meeting violence with violence. Someone asks, "You want us to fight the Klan?" Robert Williams looks him dead in the eye. "I want us to scare the Klan." And that's exactly what they do. October 5th, 1957, the night that rewrites history. The Klan has been emboldened by the kissing case verdict. They've been riding through black neighborhoods every weekend for months, intimidation runs, terror patrols. They fire guns into the air, shout threats. Sometimes they stop and drag people from their homes, beat them in the street. The police never come. The police are with them. But tonight, Robert Williams is ready. He spent months preparing for this moment, gathering weapons, training men, building a network of watchers and defenders throughout the Black community. He's formed what he calls the Black Guard, a self-defense unit of military veterans, men who fought in World War II and Korea, men who know how to shoot, men who are done being afraid. They've stockpiled rifles, pistols, ammunition. They've built fortifications around key houses. They've established communication networks and lookout posts. Robert's own house has become a fortress. Sandbags in the windows, ammunition boxes in every room, weapons stashed in strategic locations, a plan for every scenario. And tonight, the Klan is coming. The lookouts spot them first. They're coming down Boyd Street. 20 cars, maybe more. Robert moves to his porch. His wife, Mabel, loads magazines inside. His children are hidden in the back room with neighbors. The Black Guard takes position. Rooftops, windows, behind cars, behind trees. Every angle covered, every man armed and ready. The Klan convoy appears at the end of the street. Slow roll, headlights cutting through the darkness, white hoods glowing in the moonlight. They're not hiding tonight. They want to be seen. They want to terrorize. They've done this 100 times before. But tonight is different. As the lead car approaches Robert's house, he steps into full view. The Klansmen see him. They see the rifle. They probably think it's for show. One black man with one gun? What's he gonna do? Then they see the others. Shadows stepping out from behind cars, figures on rooftops, silhouettes in windows. All armed, all aiming. The lead car slows down. Robert Williams raises his M1 carbine. He doesn't point it at the sky as a warning. He points it at the driver. For 5 seconds, the world holds its breath. 20 Klansmen, 20 black defenders, 40 weapons, one spark away from a massacre. Then, Robert Williams speaks. His voice is calm, cold, clear. You've got exactly 5 seconds to turn those cars around. If you're still here at 0, we start shooting. 5. The engine idles. 4. Someone in one of the Klan cars shouts something. 3. More voices, panic creeping in. 2. A Klansman jumps out of his car and runs, just runs. Then another. Then another. 1. The lead car's tires screech as it throws into reverse. The entire convoy begins backing up, cars colliding, hoods falling off as Klansmen flee. Some abandon their vehicles entirely and run into the woods. Within 60 seconds, the street is empty. The Ku Klux Klan, the most feared terrorist organization in the South, has fled. Not from police, not from federal troops, not from the National Guard, from black men with guns. Robert Williams lowers his rifle. Around him, his men are silent, stunned. They've just done something nobody thought was possible. They've made the monsters afraid. What happens next will change everything. But first, you need to understand what this moment really means. Here's the part they erased from every textbook, the part that doesn't fit the peaceful protest narrative we're taught, the part that makes people uncomfortable. Armed self-defense worked. After that night in October 1957, the Klan never rode through black neighborhoods in Monroe again. Not once, not ever. 50 years of terror, decades of unchallenged violence, ended in one night by black men who said enough and backed it up with bullets. But here's what they don't want you to know. Robert F. Williams didn't start the armed self-defense movement. Black people had been defending themselves with weapons throughout American history. During Reconstruction, Black Union veterans formed militias to protect their communities. In the 1920s, Black neighborhoods in Tulsa fought back during the massacre, and the parts that were armed survived longer. In the 1940s and 50s, Black veterans returning from World War II refused to disarm. The NAACP's own field investigators carried weapons when traveling through the South. Even Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., the icon of nonviolence, kept guns in his home and applied for a concealed carry permit after his house was bombed. But this history was deliberately suppressed. Why? Because the mainstream civil rights narrative needed a specific story. Peaceful protests, moral high ground, turning the other cheek. That's the story white America could accept, the story that didn't threaten the power structure too much. The story of Black people asking for their rights, not demanding them. But Robert F. Williams represented something entirely different. He represented Black people saying, "We're not asking for permission anymore. We're taking what's ours, and if you try to stop us, you'll bleed." That's a dangerous story. That's a story that suggests oppressed people don't have to wait for their oppressors to have a change of heart. That's a story that suggests liberation might require more than marches and speeches. That's a story the establishment needed to bury. So they did. They wrote Robert Williams out of the civil rights movement narrative. They portrayed armed self-defense as extremism. They elevated nonviolent resistance as the only legitimate form of protest. And slowly, quietly, the story of the Black Guard faded from memory. Until now. But Robert Williams' story doesn't end with the Klan running away. It gets darker. In 1961, during a particularly violent outbreak of racial conflict in Monroe, Williams provides shelter for a white couple caught in the chaos. The couple is terrified. Williams and his wife Mabel protect them, give them food, and help them leave safely once things calm down. But the local authorities? They claim Williams kidnapped them. Read that again. He protects a white couple, and they charge him with kidnapping. The FBI issues a federal warrant for his arrest. He's added to the FBI's 10 most wanted list, one of the first Black people ever on it. Robert Williams knows what this means. If he's arrested in North Carolina, he'll never see trial. He'll be lynched, and his family will be killed. So he does the only thing he can. He runs. Williams and his family flee Monroe in the middle of the night. They drive to New York. From there, they escape to Cuba, where Fidel Castro grants them political asylum. Think about that. An American military veteran, a man who served his country, a man who only wanted to protect his community, forced to flee to Cuba for safety, because America chose the Klan over him. In exile, Williams doesn't stay quiet. He starts a radio program called Radio Free Dixie that broadcasts into the American South. He writes a book called Negroes with Guns that becomes a manifesto for armed self-defense. He influences a generation of Black activists, including Huey Newton and Bobby Seale, who will go on to form the Black Panther Party. The Panthers' famous Policing the Police patrols, where armed Black men legally carried guns to monitor police interactions, come directly from Robert Williams' playbook. His philosophy spreads. We have the right to defend ourselves. We have the right to meet violence with violence. We will not die peacefully. But the FBI works overtime to suppress his message. They monitor anyone who reads his book. They infiltrate groups inspired by his tactics. They launch COINTELPRO operations to neutralize the growing armed self-defense movement. Because Robert Williams proved something the government couldn't allow. Armed Black people are ungovernable Black people. Williams lives in exile for 8 years. Cuba,
China, Tanzania, always moving, always in danger, always fighting. Finally, in 1969, the kidnapping charges are quietly dropped. Why? Because the government knows they were bogus. They always knew. It was just an excuse to silence a dangerous truth-teller. Robert Williams returns to America, but the America he returns to barely remembers him. The civil rights movement has been sanitized, the history books have been rewritten. Nonviolence is enshrined as the only legitimate form of resistance. And Robert F. Williams, the Marin who made the Klan run, is a footnote, if he's mentioned at all. Let's talk about what Robert Williams actually believed, because this is where it gets controversial. Williams never advocated for initiating violence. He wasn't promoting terrorism. He wasn't calling for random attacks. He wasn't preaching revenge. What he advocated for was simple. If someone comes to kill you, kill them first. If the Klan shows up at your door to lynch you, shoot them. If white supremacists bomb your home, bomb theirs. If the police refuse to protect you, protect yourself. This isn't aggression. This is survival. But here's why this philosophy was so dangerous to the establishment. It removes the moral weight from the oppressor. The power of Jim Crow relied on a psychological dynamic. White supremacy maintained control through terror, and black people maintained survival through submission.
As long as black people accepted their role as victims, the system worked. But the moment black people said, "If you attack us, we'll kill you," the calculus changed. Suddenly, being in the Klan wasn't a fun Saturday night activity. It was life-threatening. Suddenly, lynching wasn't a risk-free assertion of white power. It was a potential death sentence. Suddenly, the cost of maintaining white supremacy became very high. And when the cost of oppression becomes higher than the benefit, oppression ends. This is what Robert Williams understood. He understood that moral appeals only work when your opponent has a conscience. The Klan didn't have a conscience. They had power and fear and weapons. Williams realized the only way to stop them was to take away their advantage, make them afraid, make them vulnerable, make them feel what their victims felt. Now here's the question nobody wants to ask. Was he right? History gives us clues. After armed self-defense became common in black communities, Klan violence decreased dramatically. Not because white supremacists suddenly developed empathy, because they developed fear. When the Deacons for Defense and Justice, an armed black self-defense group inspired by Williams, started protecting civil rights workers in Louisiana and Mississippi, Klan attacks in those areas dropped by 80%. When the Black Panthers started policing the police in Oakland, police brutality cases went down. Armed self-defense worked. Not always, not everywhere, but often enough to matter. Yet this fact makes people deeply uncomfortable, because it suggests that violence, or the credible threat of violence, can be a legitimate tool for oppressed people. And that contradicts everything we're taught about how social change happens. We want to believe that justice triumphs through moral persuasion, that oppressors voluntarily relinquish power when confronted with the righteousness of their victim's cause, that love conquers hate. Robert Williams believed in a different truth. Power concedes nothing without a demand, and some demands require teeth. Here's where the story gets even more complicated. Because Robert Williams and Martin Luther King Jr. knew each other. They debated, they argued, they fundamentally disagreed on tactics. But here's what most people don't know. They respected each other. In 1959, Williams was expelled from the NAACP for publicly stating that black people should meet violence with violence. The national NAACP, led by Roy Wilkins, condemned him, called him dangerous, said he was setting back the movement. But King? King never publicly attacked Williams. In private letters, King acknowledged that Williams' position came from sincere motives and that armed self-defense was legally justified. King disagreed with the tactic, but he understood the frustration that created it. Because here's the truth they don't teach you. The nonviolent movement and the armed self-defense movement weren't enemies, they were partners. Think about it strategically. King could only advocate for nonviolence credibly because people like Robert Williams existed as the alternative. When King sat down with white politicians and said, "Work with me or deal with them," the threat was real. White America chose negotiation with King partly because the alternative, armed black resistance, was terrifying. This is called the radical flank effect. Moderate demands seem reasonable when radical demands are on the table. Malcolm X understood this. He said the white power structure gave King concessions, not because they loved you, but because they feared what would happen if they didn't. Robert Williams was that fear made manifest. But here's the even deeper truth. Armed self-defense protected the nonviolent movement. When Freedom Riders traveled through the Deep South, who protected them when the police wouldn't? Armed black men in the communities they visited. When SNCC organizers registered voters in Mississippi, who kept them alive when the Klan came hunting? The Deacons for Defense, armed with rifles. When Dr. King traveled through the South after the Montgomery bus boycott, who guarded his hotel room? Armed volunteers. Nonviolence was a public tactic. Armed self-defense was the private reality. Both were necessary. Both were legitimate. Both were part of the same fight. But only one got written into the history books. Williams died in 1996 at age 71. He never got the recognition he deserved. No Presidential Medal of Freedom, no national holiday, no schools named after him. Just a quiet death and a mostly forgotten legacy. But his ideas? Those never died. They live on every time someone says, "I have the right to defend my life." Every time someone refuses to be a passive victim. Every time someone looks oppression in the eye and says, "Not me, not today." Robert F. Williams planted a seed. We don't have to die peacefully. So why don't you know this story? Why isn't Robert F. Williams' face on murals? Why isn't his story in textbooks? Why isn't his name spoken alongside King and Parks and Lewis? Because his story is too dangerous. Let me explain. The version of the civil rights movement you were taught serves a specific purpose. It's a story about good people appealing to the conscience of bad people. It's a story about suffering nobly until your oppressors feel guilty enough to change. It's a story that centers white redemption. Black people suffered so that white people could evolve. Black people turned the other cheek so that white people could see their humanity. Black people died peacefully so that America could become better. This narrative is comfortable. It doesn't threaten the fundamental power structures. It doesn't suggest that oppressed people have the right to fight back violently. It doesn't imply that justice might require making oppressors afraid. Robert F. Williams' story destroys that narrative. His story says the Klan didn't stop terrorizing black neighborhoods because they developed empathy. They stopped because they got scared. White supremacy didn't end because white people suddenly realized racism was wrong. It ended because the cost of maintaining it became too high. Black people didn't gain rights by asking nicely. They gained rights by making the alternative unthinkable. This is a profoundly uncomfortable truth because it suggests that violence, or the credible threat of violence, can be a legitimate tool for oppressed people. And that contradicts everything we're taught about how social change happens. We want to believe that justice triumphs through moral persuasion, that oppressors voluntarily relinquish power when confronted with the righteousness of their victim's cause, that love conquers hate. Robert Williams believed in a different truth. Power concedes nothing without a demand, and some demands require teeth. Here's where the story gets even more complicated. Because Robert Williams and Martin Luther King Jr. knew each other. They debated, they argued, they fundamentally disagreed on tactics. But here's what most people don't know. They respected each other. In 1959, Williams was expelled from the NAACP for publicly stating that black people should meet violence with violence. The national NAACP, led by Roy Wilkins, condemned him, called him dangerous, said he was setting back the movement. But King? King never publicly attacked Williams. In private letters, King acknowledged that Williams' position came from sincere motives and that armed self-defense was legally justified. King disagreed with the tactic, but he understood the frustration that created it. Because here's the truth they don't teach you. The nonviolent movement and the armed self-defense movement weren't enemies, they were partners. Think about it strategically. King could only advocate for nonviolence credibly because people like Robert Williams existed as the alternative. When King sat down with white politicians and said, "Work with me or deal with them," the threat was real. White America chose negotiation with King partly because the alternative, armed black resistance, was terrifying. This is called the radical flank effect. Moderate demands seem reasonable when radical demands are on the table. Malcolm X understood this. He said the white power structure gave King concessions not because they loved you, but because they feared what would happen if they didn't. Robert Williams was that fear made manifest. But here's the even deeper truth. Armed self-defense protected the nonviolent movement. When freedom riders traveled through the Deep South, who protected them when the police wouldn't? Armed black men in the communities they visited. When SNCC organizers registered voters in Mississippi, who kept them alive when the Klan came hunting? The Deacons for Defense, armed with rifles. When Dr. King traveled through the South after the Montgomery bus boycott, who guarded his hotel room? Armed volunteers. Nonviolence was a public tactic. Armed self-defense was the private reality. Both were necessary. Both were legitimate. Both were part of the same fight. But only one got written into the history books. Williams died in 1996 at age 71. He never got the recognition he deserved. No Presidential Medal of Freedom, no national holiday, no schools named after him. Just a quiet death and a mostly forgotten legacy. But his ideas? Those never died. They live on every time someone says, "I have the right to defend my life." Every time someone refuses to be a passive victim. Every time someone looks oppression in the eye and says, "Not me, not today." Robert F. Williams planted a seed. We don't have to die peacefully. So why don't you know this story? Why isn't Robert F. Williams' face on murals? Why isn't his story in textbooks? Why isn't his name spoken alongside King and Parks and Lewis? Because his story is too dangerous. Let me explain. The version of the civil rights movement you were taught serves a specific purpose. It's a story about good people appealing to the conscience of bad people. It's a story about suffering nobly until your oppressors feel guilty enough. No policies changed, no history books were rewritten, but in Monroe, North Carolina, something fundamental shifted. The Klan never rode through those neighborhoods again. The terror stopped. Not forever, not everywhere, but there, that night, for those people. Freedom. Not given, taken, at gunpoint. This is the story they don't want you to know. This is the history they tried to erase. This is the truth that makes textbooks uncomfortable and politicians nervous and historians quiet. But it's the truth, and the truth doesn't need permission to be true. Robert F. Williams died in 1996. His obituary in the New York Times was 4 paragraphs long. 4 paragraphs for a man who changed history. 4 paragraphs for a Marine who made terrorists run. 4 paragraphs for a father who taught his children they didn't have to die quietly. But maybe that's fitting, because Robert Williams didn't do what he did for recognition. He didn't stand on that porch for glory. He didn't pick up that rifle for history books. He did it for one reason, so his children could live without fear. And you know what? It worked. His children survived, his community survived, his dignity survived. The Klan came to kill them, and the Klan ran away. That's the story. That's the truth. That's the legacy of Robert F. Williams, a black Marine who looked evil in the eye and didn't blink, who taught a generation that courage isn't the absence of fear, it's the presence of purpose, who proved that sometimes the only way to stop a monster is to show it you're the monster it should have feared all along. Remember his name. Remember his courage. Remember what he proved. You don't have to die peacefully. Robert F. Williams, 1925–1996. The Marine who made monsters run. If this story made you think differently about history, share it. If this truth made you uncomfortable, sit with that. If this man's courage moved you, honor it by learning more. They tried to erase him. Don't let them succeed. His name was Robert F. Williams, and this is his story.